The autumn of 1894 brought with it a particularly disagreeable fog that settled over London like a shroud, rendering the already labyrinthine streets of our great metropolis into a veritable maze of shadow and uncertainty. It was on such an evening, as I sat beside the crackling fire in our rooms at 221B Baker Street, that I observed my friend Sherlock Holmes in one of his more contemplative moods. He sat motionless in his armchair, his long fingers steepled before his aquiline nose, his grey eyes fixed upon some invisible point in the middle distance. For 3 days he had been thus, silent, brooding, consuming little save strong coffee and the occasional slice of toast. I knew better than to interrupt these periods of mental fermentation, though I confess the silence had begun to weigh upon my spirits. "Watson," he said suddenly, without shifting his gaze, "you have been to Charing Cross this afternoon." I started in my chair. "My dear Holmes, how could you possibly—" "The mud upon your left boot is of a distinctive reddish clay, found only in the construction works near the Strand. Moreover, there is a slight discoloration on your right cuff, printer's ink of the variety used by railway timetable publishers. You have been consulting schedules, presumably for a patient requiring travel advice. The only reason you would venture to Charing Cross specifically, given that Waterloo is considerably closer, is that Mrs. Pemberton's sister resides in Dover, and you mentioned last week that the lady was unwell." "Remarkable," I exclaimed, though in truth I had grown somewhat accustomed to these displays. "You are quite correct on all counts." Holmes waved a dismissive hand. "Elementary. The mind atrophies without proper stimulation, Watson. I fear I am in danger of—" He was interrupted by the sound of urgent footsteps upon the stair, followed by a sharp rap at our door. Mrs. Hudson appeared, somewhat flustered, to announce that a gentleman had called on a matter of extreme urgency. "Show him up at once," said Holmes, a sudden animation lighting his features. He sprang from his chair with the energy of a man half his age. Our visitor proved to be a well-dressed gentleman of perhaps 50 years, with silver hair and a military bearing that spoke of discipline and authority. His face was pale, however, and his hands trembled slightly as he removed his gloves. "Mr. Holmes," he began without preamble, "I am Colonel Reginald Ashworth, formerly of the Indian Army. I come to you because Scotland Yard has proven themselves utterly incapable of comprehending the gravity of my situation. Pray be seated." "Colonel," said Holmes, gesturing to the chair I had vacated. "Watson, perhaps some brandy for our guest. Now, sir, compose yourself and tell us your tale from the beginning. Omit no detail, however insignificant it may seem." Colonel Ashworth accepted the brandy gratefully and took a steadying breath. "3 nights ago, Mr. Holmes, my brother was murdered in his own study under circumstances that defy all rational explanation." "Your brother's name?" "Sir Edmund Ashworth, a respected jeweller and gemologist. He had premises in Hatton Garden, but conducted much of his work from his residence in Belgravia, a magnificent Georgian townhouse he had occupied for nearly 20 years. Holmes leaned forward, his fingers pressed together. "And the circumstances of his death?" "He was found at his desk with a letter opener protruding from his back, driven directly into the heart with considerable force. The study was locked from the inside, Mr. Holmes. Both the door and the windows were secured, and no one could have entered or departed without being observed." "Ah," said Holmes, his eyes gleaming. "A locked room mystery. Pray continue." "The household consists of myself. I'd been staying with Edmund for the past fortnight, his wife, Lady Catherine, their daughter, Miss Violet Ashworth, the butler, Thornton, a cook, 2 housemaids, and a secretary named Mr. Philip Cartwright, who assisted Edmund with his correspondence and accounts." "And where were each of these persons when the murder occurred?" Colonel Ashworth produced a folded paper from his pocket. "I have prepared a detailed account. At approximately 9 o'clock on the evening in question, Edmund retired to his study to work on a valuation. He was particular about not being disturbed during these sessions. The gems he worked with were of considerable value, and he trusted no one to be present while he examined them." "Most prudent," murmured Holmes. "Continue." "Lady Catherine was in the drawing-room with Miss Violet, engaged in needlework. I was in the library reading. The servants were all below stairs preparing for the evening service, all except Thornton, who was in the pantry conducting an inventory of the silver." "And Mr. Cartwright?" "He had departed at 6 o'clock, as was his custom. He resides in lodgings near Russell Square." Holmes nodded slowly. When was the body discovered? At 10:30. Thornton brought the Evening Post to the study, and receiving no answer to his knock became concerned. Edmund had been suffering from a weak heart of late, and Thornton feared he might have taken ill. He summoned me, and together we forced the door. Forced it. Was it locked or merely stuck? Locked, Mr. Holmes. The key was in the lock on the inside. We heard it fall as we applied our shoulders to the door. When we entered, we found Edmund slumped over his desk in a pool of blood. The letter opener, a decorative piece with an ivory handle, was buried to the hilt between his shoulder blades. I could not suppress a shudder at this grim image. Holmes, however, remained coolly analytical. Was anything disturbed? Any sign of struggle? None whatsoever. Everything was in perfect order. Edmund's jeweler's tools lay neatly arranged on the desk. There was a velvet cloth upon which he had been examining something, though what precisely I cannot say. Nothing remained on the cloth? Nothing. It was quite empty. Holmes rose and began to pace before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. And the windows, you say, were also secured? Fastened from the inside. The study is on the second floor, and the windows overlook a small courtyard. Even had someone managed to scale the wall, which would have been remarkably difficult, they could not have opened the windows from without. Tell me about the letter opener. Was it Edmund's own? Yes, it had resided on his desk for years. A gift from a client in India, I believe. And who summoned the police? I did, immediately. Inspector Bradstreet arrived within the hour. He has been quite thorough, Mr. Holmes, but he admits himself baffled. The inquest is to be held tomorrow, and I fear the verdict will be murder by person or persons unknown, a most unsatisfactory conclusion for the family. Holmes ceased his pacing and fixed the Colonel with an penetrating stare. You have not told me everything, Colonel Ashworth. There is something else, something that has brought you to my door rather than allowing Scotland Yard to muddle through in their usual fashion. The Colonel's face darkened. You are perceptive, sir. There is indeed another element, one that fills me with the most terrible foreboding. He reached into his coat and produced a small envelope. This was found clutched in Edmund's left hand. Holmes took the envelope eagerly and examined it with his lens. It was of expensive cream-colored paper, sealed with red wax but bearing no distinguishing mark. He opened it carefully and withdrew a single card upon which were written 6 symbols in dark ink. Most intriguing, Holmes murmured. These symbols, diamonds, clubs, hearts, and spades, though the 4th is peculiar, an open diamond rather than a filled one. Can you make sense of it, Mr. Holmes? Not yet, but I shall. Tell me, Colonel, was your brother involved in anything, shall we say, irregular? Did he have enemies? Edmund was the most scrupulous of men, Mr. Holmes. His reputation was beyond reproach. That was not my question. Colonel Ashworth hesitated, then sighed. 3 months ago, Edmund received a commission from a private collector to authenticate a set of gemstones, supposedly from the crown jewels of a deposed European monarch. He concluded they were forgeries of exceptional quality. The client was displeased. The client's name? He called himself Count Vasily, though Edmund suspected it was an alias. A Russian or claiming to be one. And has this Count Vasily been located? The address he provided proved to be false. He has vanished entirely. Holmes returned to his chair, his expression one of deep concentration. Colonel Ashworth, I shall take your case. I propose to visit the scene tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp. In the meantime, I must ask you to do precisely nothing. Speak to no one about your visit here. Allow the inquest to proceed as planned. And above all, ensure that nothing in your brother's study is disturbed. The Colonel rose, relief evident in his features. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I knew you were my only hope. After our visitor had departed, I turned to Holmes with undisguised curiosity. What do you make of it? A pretty puzzle, Watson. A locked room, a cryptic message, a vanished Russian count and a family of potential suspects, each with opportunity, but no apparent means. Yes, I believe this case may provide the stimulation my mind so desperately requires, but surely the locked room presents an insurmountable difficulty. Holmes smiled. That thin, enigmatic smile I had come to know so well. My dear Watson, in all my experience I have never encountered a locked room that was truly impregnable. The question is not how the murderer entered and escaped, but why they wished us to believe the room was locked at all. That, I fancy, is where the truth of this matter lies. He reached for his pipe and tobacco, settling back into his chair. Now I suggest you get some rest. Tomorrow we shall need all our faculties about us. We are dealing with a mind of considerable cunning, one that has constructed an elaborate stage upon which to commit murder. It will require all my powers to see through the performance to the reality beneath. I retired to my room, but sleep came fitfully that night. My dreams were haunted by locked doors and mysterious symbols, and through it all, the pale face of the murdered jeweler, staring sightlessly at a velvet cloth that held nothing but secrets. The following morning dawned grey and cheerless, with a thin drizzle that seemed to permeate every corner of London. I found Holmes already dressed and consuming a hasty breakfast when I emerged from my bedroom at 7:30. His eyes held that peculiar brightness that always accompanied a challenging case, and I noticed he had arranged several reference volumes on the table, works on gemology, cryptography, and what appeared to be a treatise on medieval heraldry. "Ah, Watson," he said without looking up from the book he was scanning, "I trust you slept better than I did. I have been awake since 4, pursuing several lines of inquiry that occurred to me during the night. And have you reached any conclusions?" "Several possibilities, none of which are yet supported by sufficient evidence. However, I have made one curious discovery." He pushed the card with the mysterious symbols toward me. I spent an hour examining this with my strongest lens. The ink is of a common variety, available at any stationer's, but observe the manner in which the symbols are drawn, the pressure of the pen, the slight tremor in certain strokes. I studied the card carefully but could discern nothing remarkable. I confess I see only what I saw last night, playing card symbols. Precisely what we are meant to see. But consider, Watson, if you were creating a cipher, would you not make it appear as something innocuous? Playing card symbols suggest a gambling debt, perhaps, or some connection to games of chance. Yet Sir Edmund Ashworth was, by all accounts, not a gambling man. Then what do you suppose they represent? That is what we must discover. But first we must examine the scene itself. Come, we have no time to lose. I have already sent word to Inspector Bradstreet that we shall be calling. We arrived at the Ashworth residence in Belgravia shortly before 9 o'clock. It was indeed a magnificent Georgian townhouse, its white facade gleaming despite the dreary weather. The door was opened by a dignified butler, whom I took to be Thornton, a man of perhaps 60, years with iron-grey hair and the bearing of one who had served in noble households all his life. "Mr. Sherlock, Holmes and Dr. Watson," announced Holmes. "Colonel Ashworth is expecting us." "Indeed, sir." "Please follow me." We were shown into a morning room where Colonel Ashworth awaited us in the company of a heavy-set man with ruddy features whom I recognized as Inspector Bradstreet, of Scotland Yard. The inspector's expression suggested he was not entirely pleased by our presence, "Mr. Holmes," he said with stiff politeness. "Colonel Ashworth has informed me that you have taken an interest in this case. I am, of course, happy to afford you every facility, though I must say the Yard has conducted a most thorough investigation." "I have no doubt of it, Inspector," said Holmes smoothly. "I merely hoped that a fresh perspective might prove useful. Now, if you would be so kind as to show us the study." We ascended to the second floor, where a constable stood guard outside a heavy oak door. The damage from the forced entry was evident. The frame was splintered near the lock, though the door itself remained intact. Holmes examined the damage minutely, running his fingers along the wood and producing his lens to study the lock mechanism. "The key fell when you forced the door?" he asked the colonel. "Yes, we heard it distinctly. It was lying on the floor just inside when we entered." Holmes nodded and stepped into the study. It was a spacious room, panelled in dark wood and lined with books. A large mahogany desk dominated the centre, positioned to face the windows that overlooked the courtyard Colonel Ashworth had mentioned. The velvet cloth the colonel had described lay upon the desk, still empty. The bloodstains, though cleaned, had left dark marks upon the leather surface. Holmes stood motionless for a moment, his eyes darting about the room with that peculiar intensity I had witnessed so many times before. Then he began his examination, moving with swift precision from point to point. He inspected the windows. Both were indeed fastened from the inside with brass catches. He examined the fireplace, peering up the chimney with his lens. He scrutinized the bookshelves, the carpet, even the gas fixtures on the walls. The body was found in what position exactly? He asked, positioning himself before the desk. Slumped forward, his head resting on his right arm, replied the colonel. The letter opener was protruding from his back at an angle, suggesting a downward thrust from behind. And his left hand clutched the card? Yes, his fingers were closed around it quite tightly. We had to pry them open to retrieve it. Holmes circled the desk slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. Tell me, Inspector, what was your initial theory? Bradstreet cleared his throat. The locked room presents obvious difficulties, Mr. Holmes. My men have examined every inch of this chamber. There is no secret panel, no hidden passage. The windows cannot be opened from outside. Therefore, I am forced to conclude that Sir Edmund took his own life. With a letter opener in his back? I exclaimed. That's physically impossible. I am aware of the difficulties, Dr. Watson. However, the alternative, that someone murdered him in a locked room, seems equally impossible. Holmes had moved to the windows and was examining the courtyard below. How high are we from the ground? Approximately 20 feet, said the colonel. And before you ask, there are no drain pipes, no convenient ivy, nothing that would facilitate climbing. Yet someone did enter this room and commit murder, said Holmes quietly, still gazing out the window. The question is not whether it was possible, but how it was accomplished. He turned suddenly to face us. Colonel Ashworth, I should like to interview the members of the household. Perhaps we might begin with Lady Catherine. The colonel led us back downstairs to the drawing room, where Lady Catherine Ashworth awaited us. She was a handsome woman in her middle 40s, dressed in mourning black that accentuated the pallor of her complexion. Her eyes were red-rimmed, suggesting genuine grief. Yet she maintained a composure that spoke of considerable strength of character. Lady Catherine, said Holmes gently, bowing slightly, please accept my condolences on your loss. I realize this is a difficult time, but I must ask you several questions that may seem indelicate. I understand, Mr. Holmes. The colonel has explained that you are attempting to discover who murdered my husband. I shall answer whatever you ask if it helps bring the villain to justice. Holmes settled into a chair opposite her, his manner attentive yet analytical. I am told you were in this very room on the evening of the tragedy, engaged in needlework with your daughter. At what time did you last see Sir Edmund alive? He came to bid us good night at approximately 9:15. He mentioned he had an important valuation to complete and expected to work for several hours. He often kept late hours when examining particularly valuable pieces. Did he seem troubled or anxious in any way? Lady Catherine considered this carefully. No more than usual. Edmund had been somewhat preoccupied these past few weeks, but I attributed it to business concerns. He was not a man who readily shared his worries. These business concerns, did they relate to the incident with Count Vasily? A shadow passed across her face. You know about that affair? Yes, Edmund was deeply troubled by it. Not because of any financial loss, you understand, but because he suspected the Count was part of a larger operation dealing in forged gems. Edmund felt a responsibility to expose such practices, but he had no proof beyond his own expert opinion. Did he receive any threats following his rejection of the Count's gems? Not directly. However, there were several anonymous letters suggesting he should be more careful in his assessments. Edmund dismissed them as attempts at intimidation, but I confess they frightened me. Holmes leaned forward slightly. Do you still have these letters? Edmund kept them in his desk. I assume they are still there unless the police have removed them. We found no such letters, Lady Catherine, interjected Inspector Bradstreet. The desk drawers contained only business correspondence and account books. How curious, murmured Holmes. Lady Catherine, did your husband have any enemies that you were aware of? Business rivals, perhaps, or dissatisfied clients? Edmund was scrupulously honest in all his dealings, Mr. Holmes. That very honesty sometimes made him unpopular with those who wished him to authenticate pieces of dubious provenance. But I can think of no one who would wish him dead. What of his personal relationships? How did he get along with the household staff? Perfectly well. Thornton has been with us for 15 years and is devoted to the family. The other servants are all trustworthy and respectable. We have never had cause for complaint. And Mr. Cartwright, the secretary, a competent young man. Edmund found him invaluable for managing his correspondence and keeping his accounts in order. Philip, Mr. Cartwright, has been with us for 3 years. Holmes shifted in his chair. On the night of the murder, you and Miss Violet remained in this room until when? Until we heard the commotion upstairs, the sound of the Colonel and Thornton forcing the door. That was at approximately 10:30. We rushed upstairs immediately and found— Her voice caught. We found Edmund dead at his desk. During those hours between 9 and 10:30, did you hear anything unusual? Any sounds from the study above? Nothing whatsoever. The study is well insulated, and Edmund preferred silence when he worked. We heard no disturbance at all. Holmes rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the street. One final question, Lady Catherine. The velvet cloth upon your husband's desk, do you know what he was examining that evening? I'm afraid I don't. Edmund rarely discussed specific valuations with me. He believed it was safer if I remained ignorant of the details. Safer, repeated Holmes thoughtfully. An interesting choice of words. Thank you, Lady Catherine. You have been most helpful. He turned to the Colonel. Might I now speak with Miss Violet? The young lady who entered a few moments later was a striking beauty of perhaps 22 years, with dark hair and her mother's fine features. Unlike Lady Catherine, however, she appeared more agitated than sorrowful, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers as she took a seat. Miss Ashworth, began Holmes, I shall be brief. Can you corroborate your mother's account of the evening? Yes, entirely. We were together the whole time. I was embroidering a cushion cover, while Mother read aloud from a novel. We heard nothing until the terrible discovery. You were on good terms with your father? Of course. Her answer came quickly, perhaps too quickly. Papa was always kind to me. Always. Holmes's tone was mild, but I detected the sharpness beneath it. Miss Violet coloured slightly. I mean to say we had our disagreements like any family, but nothing serious. What sort of disagreements? She glanced at her mother before answering. Papa could be old-fashioned in his views. He did not approve of my friendship with Mr. Cartwright. He thought Philip, Mr. Cartwright, was too far beneath our station. Indeed, and yet he employed Mr. Cartwright as his secretary. Papa respected his abilities, while disapproving of any social connection beyond the professional. He expressly forbade Philip from calling upon me, except in the course of business. And did Mr. Cartwright honour this prohibition? Another hesitation. Not always. We would sometimes meet by chance when I was out walking. Papa discovered this once and was quite angry about it. Holmes nodded slowly, filing this information away in that remarkable mind of his. When did this confrontation occur? A fortnight ago. Papa threatened to dismiss Philip if it happened again. Holmes's expression remained impassive, though I knew him well enough to recognize the significance he attached to this revelation. A fortnight ago, he repeated. That would place the confrontation shortly after your uncle arrived to stay. Tell me, Miss Ashworth, where was Mr. Cartwright at 6 o'clock on the evening of the murder, when he supposedly departed for his lodgings? I cannot say with certainty. I was upstairs changing for dinner when he left. Did you see him leave? No, but Thornton showed him out, as he always does. And you did not encounter Mr. Cartwright later that evening? Perhaps on one of your walks? Miss Violet's face flushed crimson. Certainly not. I was with my mother the entire evening, as we have both told you. Holmes regarded her for a long moment, before offering a thin smile. Thank you, Miss Ashworth. You have been most illuminating. He turned to the Colonel. I should now like to speak with Thornton, and then Mr. Cartwright. Is the secretary in the house at present? He is working in the small office off the library, replied the Colonel. He has been helping to organize Edmund's papers for the solicitor. Excellent. Thornton first, if you please. The butler entered with the dignified bearing I had observed earlier. He stood before us with his hands clasped, his expression one of professional deference tinged with sorrow. Thornton, said Holmes, you have served this household for 15 years, I understand. Yes, sir. I came to Sir Edmund shortly after his marriage to Lady Catherine. And in all that time, did you ever know your master to have enemies or to express fear for his safety? Never, sir. Sir Edmund was a respected gentleman. He conducted his business with the utmost propriety. Yet there were anonymous threatening letters, were there not? Thornton's composure wavered slightly. I was not aware that Lady Catherine had mentioned those. Yes, sir. There were several such letters over the past 2 months. Sir Edmund showed them to me and asked if I had noticed any suspicious persons loitering about the house. And had you? No, sir. I keep a careful watch over who approaches the premises. Holmes began to pace slowly before the fireplace. On the evening of the murder, you showed Mr. Cartwright out at 6 o'clock. Did you observe anything unusual about his behavior? Nothing whatsoever, sir. Mr. Cartwright departed as he always does, bidding me good evening and walking toward the corner where he usually hails a cab. You watched him depart? For a moment, yes, sir. It is my habit to ensure visitors leave the property safely. Most commendable. And during the evening, did you leave your post below stairs? Only to conduct my inventory of the silver in the pantry, as I mentioned to the Colonel. That occupied me from approximately 8 o'clock until 9:30. The pantry, that is adjacent to the kitchen? Yes, sir. And during this hour and a half you saw and heard nothing unusual? Nothing at all, sir. The evening was perfectly routine, until Sir Edmund failed to answer my knock at 10:30. Holmes stopped pacing and fixed Thornton with a penetrating stare. When you and the Colonel forced the door, you heard the key fall inside. Are you absolutely certain of that? Quite certain, sir. We both heard it distinctly, a metallic sound as it struck the floor. And when you entered, where exactly was the key lying? Thornton closed his eyes, clearly attempting to recall the precise details. Approximately 2 feet from the door, sir, slightly to the right. I remember because I nearly stepped upon it in my haste to reach Sir Edmund. 2 feet from the door, Holmes repeated softly. Most interesting. That will be all, Thornton. Please ask Mr. Cartwright to attend us. When the butler had departed, Inspector Bradstreet cleared his throat. I fail to see the significance of the key's position, Mr. Holmes. Surely it could have bounced when it fell. Could it, Inspector? A heavy brass key dropping from a lock onto a carpeted floor? I think not. But let us reserve judgment until we have heard from Mr. Cartwright. The secretary proved to be a slight young man of perhaps 28, with sandy hair and intelligent grey eyes that betrayed considerable anxiety. He entered the room with visible reluctance and remained standing until Holmes gestured to a chair. Mr. Cartwright, I understand you have been Sir Edmund's secretary for 3 years. What were your duties exactly? I managed his correspondence, maintained his appointment diary and kept his accounts. Sir Edmund dealt in valuable gems, Mr. Holmes, and required meticulous records for both his clients and the tax authorities. And you departed at 6 o'clock on the evening of the murder? Yes, sir. It was my usual time. Sir Edmund had no further need of me that day. Did he mention what he would be working on that evening? Cartwright hesitated. He said only that he had a private valuation to complete. He did not elaborate, and it was not my place to inquire. You were aware, I presume, of the incident with Count Vasily. I knew that Sir Edmund had rejected certain gems as forgeries. The Count was not pleased and left in a fury. That was some 3 months ago, and the threatening letters that followed. Sir Edmund received several anonymous communications. He did not show them to me, but I gathered from his demeanor that they concerned him. Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Mr. Cartwright, I must ask you a direct question, and I require an honest answer. What is the nature of your relationship with Miss Violet Ashworth? The young man's face paled. We are friends, Mr. Holmes, nothing more. Come now, Mr. Cartwright. Sir Edmund discovered you meeting his daughter clandestinely and threatened you with dismissal. That suggests something more than friendship. Cartwright's composure crumbled. I love her, Mr. Holmes. I know I am beneath her station, but my feelings are sincere. Sir Edmund was adamant that there could be nothing between us. And how did you respond to his ultimatum? Holmes's voice remained level, betraying no judgment, merely seeking facts. I assured him that I would respect his wishes. I valued my position, Mr. Holmes, and I had no desire to cause distress to the family. Violet and I agreed to maintain only a professional distance until such time as I might improve my circumstances sufficiently to approach Sir Edmund with an honourable proposal. Not lie, necessarily, but perhaps they were mistaken about what they heard, or perhaps one of them is being less than truthful. Holmes turned his penetrating gaze upon the butler. "Thornton, you arrived at the study door first, did you not?" "The colonel and I arrived together, sir. He had been in the library, I in the pantry. We met at the foot of the stairs and ascended together, yet someone had to turn the handle, apply force to the door. Who took the lead?" Thornton hesitated for the briefest moment. "I believe I did, sir. The colonel was directly behind me. So you were the first to enter the room?" "We entered almost simultaneously, sir. Perhaps I crossed the threshold a moment before the colonel, but we both saw Sir Edmund at the same instant." Holmes walked to the windows and gazed out at the courtyard below, his hands clasped behind his back. For several long moments he remained silent, lost in thought. When he finally spoke, his words were carefully measured. "There is one other element we have not yet addressed, the cryptic card found in Sir Edmund's hand. Inspector, have you made any progress in deciphering its meaning?" "None whatsoever, Mr. Holmes. We consulted several experts on codes and ciphers, but they could make nothing of it." Holmes withdrew the card from his pocket and studied it once more. 6 symbols: diamond, club, heart, open diamond, spade, club. If these represent playing cards, we have an unusual hand, 2 clubs and 2 diamonds of different designs. Yet Sir Edmund was not a gambler. Why would he clutch such a card in his dying moments? "Perhaps his murderer left it," I suggested. "Her signature of sorts. A distinct possibility, Watson. Or perhaps it is a message. Something Sir Edmund was trying to communicate to us." Holmes held the card up to the light streaming through the window. "The paper is of excellent quality, the ink precisely applied. This was not hastily scrawled in the throes of death. It was prepared beforehand with care and deliberation. Then Sir Edmund knew he was in danger. Asked the colonel, so it would appear. Yet he took no measures to protect himself, made no attempt to summon help." "Why?" Holmes pocketed the card and turned to face us. "Gentlemen, I have seen enough here for the moment. Inspector Bradstreet, I wonder if you might provide me with a list of everyone who has entered this study since the murder was discovered." "Of course, Mr. Holmes. Aside from the family and yourself, only my constables and the police surgeon have been admitted." "And the police surgeon's findings?" "Death by stabbing, between 9 and 11 o'clock on the night in question. The wound penetrated the heart. Death would have been nearly instantaneous." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "I should like to speak with the surgeon myself, if that can be arranged. Also, I need to know more about Count Vasily and his forged gems. Colonel, did your brother keep records of his dealings with this individual?" "Edmund kept meticulous records of all his professional dealings," replied the colonel. "They should be among his papers. Mr. Cartwright would know where to find them." We descended once more to the library, where Cartwright was discovered sorting through a considerable stack of documents. He looked up nervously as we entered, his hands trembling slightly as he set down the papers he had been examining. "Mr. Cartwright," said Holmes, "I require any records pertaining to Count Vasily, correspondence, invoices, assessment reports, anything that might shed light on that transaction." The secretary rose and went to a filing cabinet in the corner. "Sir Edmund kept a separate file for problematic cases," he said, producing a manila folder. "The Vasily matter is documented here in its entirety." Holmes accepted the folder eagerly and settled into a chair to examine its contents. I observed him as he read, noting the subtle changes in his expression, a raised eyebrow here, a slight pursing of the lips there. After several minutes he looked up, most illuminating. According to these notes, Count Vasily presented 6 gemstones for authentication on the 14th of July, 3 diamonds and 3 rubies. Sir Edmund's initial examination suggested they were of exceptional quality and likely of royal provenance, as the Count claimed. However, upon closer inspection using spectroscopic analysis, Sir Edmund determined that all 6 stones were sophisticated forgeries, probably created using modern chemical processes, unavailable in the period from which they supposedly originated. "And the Count's reaction?" I asked. Sir Edmund notes that the gentleman became agitated and somewhat threatening when presented with these findings. He demanded the return of the stones and departed in haste, refusing to pay Sir Edmund's assessment fee. Holmes flipped through several more pages. There is a notation here dated 3 days later. Received anonymous letter, suggesting I reconsider my findings regarding the V stones. Tone menacing. Have forwarded copy to Scotland Yard. Inspector Bradstreet frowned. I have no record of any such report. The Yard certainly received no complaint from Sir Edmund Ashworth. Perhaps it was mislaid, or perhaps Sir Edmund thought better of making an official complaint. Either way, the threatening correspondence began immediately after the Vasili incident. Holmes returned his attention to the file. There is one further item of interest, a sketch Sir Edmund made of the arrangement of the 6 stones. Observe. He held up a page upon which Sir Edmund had drawn 6 circles in 2 neat rows of 3, each carefully labelled with technical specifications. The arrangement was identical to the impressions Holmes had observed on the velvet cloth. The same configuration, I said. Then the stones on his desk that evening were the Vasili gems? Or stones of similar size and arrangement? But how did they come to be in Sir Edmund's possession again? And more importantly, where are they now? Holmes closed the file and fixed Cartwright with a penetrating stare. Did Sir Edmund mention anything to you about re-examining these particular stones? Nothing, Mr. Holmes. I was unaware he had any further dealings with Count Vasili. Yet someone brought those stones or similar ones to this house on the night of the murder. Someone who arranged them precisely as they had been arranged during the original assessment. Holmes rose and began to pace, his fingers drumming against his chin. The pattern becomes clearer, though several pieces remain maddeningly elusive. At that moment Thornton appeared in the doorway. Pardon the interruption, gentlemen, but there is a person at the door asking to speak with whoever is investigating Sir Edmund's death. A foreign gentleman, rather insistent. Holmes's eyes lit with interest. Show him in at once, Thornton. Andreev hesitated, choosing his words carefully. In my business, Mr. Holmes, one learns not to inquire too closely into a client's background. The Count presented himself as Russian aristocracy. claimed his family's estates were seized during political troubles. It is a common enough story among émigrés. Whether it is true, he shrugged eloquently. But you had suspicions, said Holmes. It was a statement, not a question. Andreev sighed heavily. A man in my profession develops certain instincts, Mr. Holmes. The Count spoke Russian fluently. Yes, but there were peculiarities in his accent, traces of something else beneath it. German, perhaps, or Polish. And his knowledge of Russian noble families was imperfect. When he mentioned his estate near Kiev, he made several geographical errors that a true aristocrat would never make. Yet you continued to do business with him. I am a middleman, Mr. Holmes, not a policeman. If his money was good and his transactions legal, it was not my place to interrogate his credentials. Andreev shifted uncomfortably. However, after the incident with Sir Edmund, I began to make more thorough inquiries. What I discovered troubled me greatly. Go on. The gemstones the Count presented to Sir Edmund were not the first forgeries he had attempted to sell. Through my contacts, I learned of at least 3 other instances in Paris, Vienna, and Amsterdam, where similar stones were rejected by experts. In each case, the Count used a different name. Once he was Prince Orlov, another time Baron Korsakov. Always Russian nobility, always claiming the gems were family heirlooms being sold due to financial necessity. Holmes's eyes gleamed with the light of the hunt. And these other experts, did any of them meet with misfortune? That is precisely what alarmed me. The expert in Amsterdam, a man named Van der Meer, died in what was ruled an accidental fall from his window. This was perhaps 6 weeks after he exposed the Count's forgeries. The incident in Vienna occurred earlier, and I have been unable to determine if there were any consequences for that assessor. Inspector Bradstreet had been listening with growing concern. Mr. Andreev, why did you not come forward with this information sooner? I learned of the Amsterdam death only yesterday, Inspector. I immediately began to fear for Sir Edmund's safety. I came here this morning intending to warn him, only to discover from the newspaper that I was too late. Andreev's voice carried genuine distress. I cannot help but feel partially responsible. Had I been more diligent in investigating the Count's background, you could not have known, said Holmes, though his tone was abstracted, as if his mind were already racing ahead to connect these new facts with the existing puzzle. Mr. Andreev, can you describe this Count Vasily to us? His physical appearance, any distinguishing characteristics? Tall, perhaps 6 feet. Broad-shouldered, military bearing, dark hair and beard, both well-groomed. Age difficult to determine. Anywhere from 40 to 55 years. He wore expensive clothing, carried himself with aristocratic bearing. His hands, Andreev paused, remembering. His hands were unusual for a nobleman. They were rough, calloused, the hands of someone accustomed to manual labor. Most interesting. And did he always work alone, or were there associates? I dealt only with the Count himself, but I had the impression he was not acting independently. Once, when we met at a cafe, I saw him in conversation with another man, younger, clean-shaven, with the look of a clerk or secretary. They seemed to be discussing documents of some sort. Holmes rose abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the grey afternoon. Mr. Andreev, you have been most helpful. I wonder if I might impose upon you to remain in London for the next few days. I may require your assistance in identifying this mysterious Count, should we locate him. Of course. Mr. Holmes, I am staying at the Langham Hotel. You may reach me there at any time. Andreev stood, preparing to depart. I pray you will catch this villain before he harms anyone else. After Andreev had been shown out, Holmes turned to us with an expression of intense concentration. Gentlemen, we now have a clearer picture of our adversary. This so-called Count Vasily is no aristocrat, but rather a sophisticated criminal engaged in a scheme to sell forged gemstones to wealthy collectors. When his deceptions are exposed, the experts who expose him suffer fatal accidents. Sir Edmund's murder fits this pattern perfectly. Then we must circulate a description of this Count immediately, said Bradstreet. Every port, every railway station. I think you will find that the bird has already flown, Inspector. A man who has operated under multiple identities across several countries is not likely to remain in London after committing murder. Holmes began to pace, his movements quick and agitated. No, there is something more here, something we are not seeing. Why did Sir Edmund have those stones, or stones matching that configuration on his desk on the night he died? Did the Count return with them? Did he attempt to bribe Sir Edmund to change his assessment? Perhaps Sir Edmund threatened to expose the Count's entire operation, I suggested. That would certainly provide motive for murder. Indeed it would, Watson. But it does not solve our fundamental problem, the locked room. How did the murderer enter and exit that study, leaving it sealed from within? Holmes stopped his pacing suddenly, his attention caught by something. Colonel Ashworth, the windows of the study overlook a courtyard, you said. What lies beyond that courtyard? The mews, Mr. Holmes. The stables and carriage house, though we no longer keep horses. The building has been converted to storage. I should like to examine those premises. Inspector Watson, will you accompany me? We followed Holmes through the house and out into the small courtyard. The afternoon light was fading, and a chill wind had picked up, sending dead leaves skittering across the cobblestones. The mews building stood perhaps 30 feet from the main house, a sturdy brick structure with large doors that presumably once admitted carriages. Holmes examined the courtyard with minute attention, pacing its perimeter and occasionally kneeling to inspect the ground. When he reached the wall directly beneath the study windows, he stopped and produced his lens, examining the brickwork with painstaking care. "Aha," he said softly. "Watson, come here and tell me what you observe about this wall." I moved to his side and looked where he indicated. At first I saw nothing unusual, merely old brick weathered by time and the elements. But then, looking more closely, I noticed something peculiar. "There are fresh scratches on the mortar," I said, tracing them with my finger. "As though something has scraped against the wall recently?" "Precisely. And observe the pattern. They run vertically, consistent with a ladder or rope having been placed here." Holmes straightened and looked upward at the study windows. "The distance is approximately 20 feet, as the Colonel stated. Difficult but not impossible for a determined climber, particularly one with equipment." Inspector Bradstreet had joined us and was examining the marks with interest. "But, Mr. Holmes, we established that the windows were fastened from the inside. How could anyone have climbed down and then secured the catches behind them?" "An excellent question, Inspector, and one that goes to the heart of our mystery." Holmes turned his attention to the mews building. "Colonel, may we examine the interior?" The Colonel produced a key and unlocked the large doors. Inside, the space had been converted into a storage area for furniture, trunks, and various household items draped in dust cloths. The air was musty and undisturbed, suggesting no one had entered in some time. Holmes moved methodically through the space, examining windows, checking the walls, even inspecting the ceiling beams. He was particularly interested in the windows that faced the main house, noting their position relative to the study above. "These windows provide an excellent vantage point," he observed. "One could observe the study quite clearly from here, particularly at night when the gas lamps are lit." He turned to the Colonel. "Who has access to this building?" "Only myself and Thornton. The key hangs in the butler's pantry, though I cannot say with certainty that it is always kept there." "I see." Holmes continued his examination, eventually climbing a rickety ladder to inspect the upper level, where old furniture and boxes had been stored. I heard him moving about overhead, the floorboards creaking beneath his weight. After several minutes he descended, brushing dust from his coat. "Nothing conclusive, but suggestive nonetheless," he announced. "The dust on the floor has been disturbed near the window facing the house, not recently, but within the past few weeks. Someone has been observing the household from this vantage point." We returned to the courtyard, where Holmes stood for a long moment studying the configuration of the buildings, the windows, the distances involved. I could see his mind working, assembling pieces of the puzzle into some pattern that remained invisible to the rest of us. "Watson," he said suddenly, "you are familiar with the properties of various chemicals and compounds from your medical training. If one wished to create a sophisticated forgery of a gemstone, a diamond, say, or a ruby, what methods might one employ?" I considered the question carefully. "I am not an expert in such matters, but I believe modern techniques involve crystal growth, chemical vapor deposition, that sort of thing. The processes require considerable expertise and specialized equipment. Indeed, not the work of a common criminal, but rather someone with technical knowledge and access to laboratory facilities." Holmes turned to Inspector Bradstreet. "Inspector, I wonder if your men have made inquiries among the chemical suppliers and laboratory equipment dealers in London. Someone has been producing these forgeries, and they must obtain their materials somewhere. I shall initiate such inquiries immediately, Mr. Holmes." Excellent. Also, I should like a complete list of everyone who has entered the Ashworth household in the past 3 months. Tradesmen, delivery persons, visitors, everyone. Someone has been gathering intelligence about Sir Edmund's habits and the layout of his home. We returned to the house as the lamps were being lit against the gathering dusk. Holmes requested a private room where he might think undisturbed, and the Colonel provided us with the use of the library. Once alone, Holmes flung himself into a chair and pressed his fingers to his temples. "I am missing something, Watson. Something fundamental. The pieces are all here, but they refuse to form a coherent picture." I settled into the chair opposite him. "Let us review what we know. Sir Edmund was murdered in his locked study while examining gemstones that may have been the forged stones from Count Vasili's collection. The murderer somehow entered the room, committed the crime and departed, leaving the door apparently locked from within. Sir Edmund clutched a cryptic card bearing playing card symbols. The threatening letters that preceded the murder have disappeared, and we have reason to believe someone has been observing the household from the Mews building. All true, but it does not explain the mechanism of the crime. How was it done?" Holmes rose and began to pace. "Consider the key, Watson. Found 2 feet from the door, supposedly having fallen when the door was forced. But our experiment demonstrated that this is impossible. The key would not fall in such a manner. Then it was placed there deliberately. Yes, but by whom? Colonel Ashworth and Thornton both claim they heard it fall. Are they both lying? Or is there another explanation?" Before I could respond, there came a soft knock at the door. Thornton entered, carrying a silver tray with tea and sandwiches. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Holmes, but Mrs. Hudson sent word that you should eat something. You've had nothing since breakfast." "Most thoughtful," said Holmes absently. "Thornton, a question. On the night of the murder, when you conducted your inventory of the silver, were you alone in the pantry?" "Yes, sir. The other servants were in the kitchen or above stairs attending to their duties, and the door to the pantry. Was it closed?" "I believe so, sir. I prefer to work without interruption during inventory, as it requires careful attention to the records. Could someone have passed through the house without your knowledge during that time?" Thornton considered this carefully. "It is possible, sir, though unlikely. The pantry is situated such that one must pass nearby to reach the main staircase from the servants' quarters. But not impossible. No, sir, not impossible." After Thornton had departed, Holmes turned to me with renewed energy. "You see, Watson? Another piece of the puzzle. During the critical period between 9 and 10:30, Thornton was sequestered in the pantry. The family members were in their respective rooms, and the servants were occupied with their duties. Anyone familiar with the household routine would know this was the optimal time to act. But that still leaves us with the problem of the locked room," I objected. "Unless the murderer possessed a duplicate key." "Ah, but there's the rub, Watson. A duplicate key would allow entry, certainly. But how does one lock the door from the inside while standing outside in the corridor?" Holmes resumed his pacing, his movements becoming more agitated. Unless the lock was never engaged at all until after the murder was discovered. But both the Colonel and Thornton heard the key fall, did they? Or did they hear something else, something they interpreted as the key falling because that was what they expected to hear? Holmes stopped abruptly, his eyes widening. "Good heavens, Watson, I have been extraordinarily blind. The answer has been before us all along." Before he could elaborate, there came a more urgent knocking at the door. Inspector Bradstreet entered, his face flushed with excitement. "Mr. Holmes, we may have a breakthrough. One of my constables has been making inquiries at the railway stations as you suggested. A man matching Count Vasili's description purchased a ticket to Dover on the morning after the murder. He was accompanied by a younger man, clean-shaven, clerk-like in appearance, just as Andreev described." "Dover," murmured Holmes. "The Continental ferry. They would be in France by now, possibly beyond our reach. Did the constable obtain any other details?" "The booking clerk remembered them because they purchased first-class tickets, but carried no luggage, most unusual for passengers bound for the continent. Also, the younger man appeared nervous, kept glancing about as though expecting to be followed." Holmes's expression grew thoughtful. "2 men fleeing to the continent immediately after the murder, one matching our suspect's description. It appears damning, does it not?" "You sound skeptical, Mr. Holmes." "I am skeptical of solutions that present themselves too conveniently, Inspector. However, we cannot ignore this information. I suggest you telegraph the Dover police and the French authorities, with descriptions of both men. If they can be apprehended, we may yet get to the truth of this matter. After Bradstreet had departed to send his telegrams, Holmes turned to me with an expression I had rarely seen, one of profound uncertainty. "Watson, I am going to do something I have never done before in a case of this magnitude. I am going to share with you my current theory, incomplete though it is, in hopes that articulating it may reveal the flaw in my reasoning." I leaned forward, honored by this unusual confidence. "Please go on." "I believe the murder of Sir Edmund Ashworth was planned with considerable sophistication by someone intimately familiar with this household. The locked room was an elaborate piece of misdirection, designed to focus our attention on an impossible problem while the truth lay elsewhere. The key was placed on the floor after the door was opened, and both witnesses were manipulated into believing they heard it fall. But how could such manipulation be accomplished? That is where my theory becomes more speculative. Consider the position of the witnesses when they forced the door. Colonel Ashworth behind Thornton, neither with a clear view of the interior until they had fully entered. A small object dropped at the precise moment the door gave way would create a sound similar to a falling key. In the confusion and horror of discovering the body, neither man would have thought to question what they heard. Then you're suggesting Thornton is the murderer? But what possible motive? Not Thornton necessarily, though his position in the household bears examination. But consider also young Cartwright, who had both motive and opportunity, or even Colonel Ashworth himself, who inherits a substantial bequest under his brother's will. Any of them could have committed the crime and then created the illusion of the locked room. I shook my head, bewildered. But the windows, Holmes, they were fastened from the inside as well. Were they? Or were they simply found to be fastened when examined after the fact? In the chaos of the discovery, with all attention focused on the body and the forced door, who actually tested the windows immediately? Anyone could have secured them in the minutes before the police arrived. This reasoning was so cynical, so contrary to Holmes's usual reliance on physical evidence, that I found myself troubled. "How you seem to be suggesting that we cannot trust any of the evidence we have been given. Not trust blindly, at any rate. Someone in this household is lying, Watson, and until I determine who and why, I cannot—" He stopped suddenly, his attention caught by something outside the window. "What's that? Do you see that light in the Mews building?" I moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. Sure enough, a faint light was visible through one of the windows of the converted stable, perhaps one of the servants. So I suggested, "At this hour, and without authorization?" Holmes was already moving toward the door. "Come, Watson, quickly. Bring your revolver." We hurried through the house and out into the courtyard. The evening had grown quite dark, and a fog was beginning to roll in from the Thames. The light in the Mews building flickered and moved, suggesting someone carrying a lantern. Holmes approached the door silently, testing the handle. It was unlocked. He pushed it open carefully, and we slipped inside. The interior was dark, save for the moving light ahead of us, which appeared to be on the upper level where Holmes had searched earlier. We could hear sounds now, someone moving objects, searching for something. Holmes began to climb the ladder, moving with remarkable stealth for a man of his height. I followed, my hand on my revolver, prepared for any eventuality. As we reached the upper level, the lantern light suddenly steadied, and we heard a sharp intake of breath. "Who's there?" called a voice. A woman's voice, trembling with fear or perhaps guilt. Holmes struck a match and lit the lamp he had brought from the house. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were 6 gleaming gemstones, 3 diamonds and 3 rubies arranged precisely as Holmes had described from Sir Edmund's sketch. "The Vasili stones," Holmes said. "So they did return to this house." "Tell me how." "Philip brought them," Violet said quietly. "Mr. Cartwright. 3 days before Papa's death, a package arrived for him by special courier. Papa was not at home, and Philip accepted it on his behalf. He should have placed it immediately in Papa's study, but he opened it. He saw the stones and recognized them from Papa's description of the Vasili affair." "Go on," Holmes urged. "Philip came to me in great distress. He had examined the package more carefully and found a note concealed within the wrapping. The note said that these were the genuine stones, the real crown jewels, and that the stones Papa had examined previously were authentic as well. Count Vasili had been telling the truth. But someone had switched the real stones for forgeries after Papa's assessment, making him appear to have been mistaken or dishonest. I felt a chill run down my spine. A scheme to destroy Sir Edmund's reputation. Precisely, said Holmes, and an ingenious one. If word spread that Sir Edmund Ashworth had declared genuine royal jewels to be forgeries, his credibility would be ruined. No collector would trust his assessments again. But why would Mr. Cartwright not simply deliver the package to Sir Edmund? Violet's face reddened. Because of what else was in the note. It said that if Papa examined these stones and declared them genuine, thereby admitting his error, he would be paid £10,000. But if he refused, if he persisted in his original assessment, then evidence would be provided to the authorities showing that Papa had been bribed to declare the stones false, that he was part of a conspiracy to defraud Count Vasily. Blackmail, I said. Heads they win, tails Sir Edmund loses, Philip panicked. He knew Papa would never compromise his principles, would never admit to an error he had not made. He feared that Papa would be ruined either way, either by appearing incompetent or by appearing corrupt. So he hid the package. He removed the stones and the note, thinking to protect Papa by preventing him from ever receiving the ultimatum. Holmes's expression was grave, but someone knew the package had been delivered. Someone was expecting a response. Yes, 2 days later another note arrived, delivered by hand to Philip directly. It said that time was running out, that Papa had one final chance to examine the stones and make his decision. If he did not respond by the night of— her voice broke. By the night Papa died, then the false evidence would be sent to Scotland Yard and to Papa's most important clients. And Mr. Cartwright? He came to me in desperation. He confessed what he had done, begged me to help him. We were foolish, Mr. Holmes. We thought if we could somehow make the stones disappear permanently, if no one ever found them, then the whole matter would simply fade away. Papa would never have to make the terrible choice they were forcing upon him. So you hid them here in the mews. Yes, on the very night of Papa's death, after the police had come and gone, Philip slipped away from his lodgings and met me here. We chose this trunk because no one ever comes up here. We thought they would be safe until we could determine what to do with them. Holmes was silent for a long moment, his keen mind clearly working through the implications of this revelation. Miss Ashworth, where was Mr. Cartwright between the hours of 9 and 10:30 on the night your father was murdered? He was with me, she said, her voice barely audible, in the garden behind the house. We had arranged to meet there so he could give me the stones. That is why I said I was with Mama all evening. I was trying to protect both Philip and myself, so neither of you has an alibi that can be corroborated by an independent witness. No, she looked at him with desperate eyes. But Mr. Holmes, I swear to you, neither Philip nor I harmed Papa. We loved him. Everything we did, however misguided, was done to protect him. Holmes took the box from her hands and examined the stones carefully with his lens. After several minutes of intense scrutiny, he looked up with an expression of grim satisfaction. These stones are forgeries, Miss Ashworth. Excellent forgeries, nearly perfect in their execution, but forgeries nonetheless. Just as the original stones were forgeries, Count Vasily, or whoever he truly is, never possessed any genuine crown jewels. The entire affair was an elaborate confidence scheme with your father as the intended victim. Violet stared at him in horror. Then Papa was right all along. He was never wrong. He was never wrong about the stones. But he was wrong about something else. He underestimated the ruthlessness of his adversaries. Holmes returned the stones to the box and secured it under his arm. Come, we must return to the house. There are still several questions that require answers, and I believe the time has come to force the final revelation. We made our way back across the courtyard, Miss Ashworth between us, her face streaked with tears. In the drawing room, we found the entire household assembled, Lady Catherine and Colonel Ashworth, Inspector Bradstreet and his constables, Thornton and the other servants, and Philip Cartwright, who rose with a cry when he saw Violet. Holmes held up a hand for silence. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to announce that the mystery of Sir Edmund Ashworth's murder is solved. The method, the motive, and the identity of the murderer are all now clear to me. What remains is to demonstrate the proof. Every eye in the room was fixed upon him. Holmes set the box of gemstones on a table and began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. Let me begin with the locked room, that seemingly impossible problem that has confounded us from the start. The truth is that the room was never locked during the commission of the murder. The door was secured only after Sir Edmund was already dead. "But the key fell when we forced the door," protested Colonel Ashworth. "We both heard it." "You heard something fall, Colonel. But it was not the key dropping from the lock. It was this." Holmes reached into his pocket and produced a small brass object, a curtain weight of the type used throughout the house. This was dropped deliberately at the moment the door gave way, creating a sound identical to a falling key. The actual key was already on the floor, placed there moments earlier by someone who had just locked the door from the inside, using a duplicate key.